Racism 2020 Pathways to Taking Its Last Breath. It's very good to have you all with us. We will open the seminar just by a conversation between Lorraine Williams and myself, and that will tell you how it all started. So Lorraine, she's on the screen as well now. So I remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking in this Friendship House community that we are both part of in Aberdeen. We were talking about the events in the wake of the killing of George Floyd. And you were sharing some of your experiences living in LA. And I just find it fascinating to listen to you, to hear your experience of racism. And I was struck by a couple of things that you said. So I think the way it happened really is that I invited you to talk a bit more over email, and then, well, I made one mistake, and maybe you can tell about that.
I wouldn't call it a mistake. Yes, as you're right, we were talking about racism just a little bit, and then you reached out to me, sent me an email and said, can we talk a little bit more? I said, sure, not a problem. You said, well, we can invite some other people, and you can make it as small or as large as you want. And so I'm one of those people, go big or go home. And so here we are with a webinar with over 100 people. So it seems like it's a title that most people want to hear about. And so that's why we're here.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. And one of the questions that I had at that time, it was a couple of days after George Floyd was killed. And one of the questions that I had was, what does it mean for me as a white person to share stuff on social media? Because all kinds of things were going around, videos going viral, text, newspaper articles, blog posts. And I was wondering, what does it mean for me living in the UK, in Aberdeen, to post something about what was happening in the US in a very different context than the UK. But nevertheless, I also realized that racism is everywhere. It's not a US thing only. It's also in the UK. It's also in Belgium, the Netherlands, countries where I've lived in before. It's everywhere, isn't it? But the question still haunts me in a sense. What does it mean for me to share something? What does it mean? What does it mean to be a good ally, so to speak?
Well, one of the things that you and I talked about was that a lot of times people in their circle, they say things in their circle, but they have a different appearance when they're in front of us, a woman like me, a Black woman. And it's very hard to see that. And what I mean by that is the word nigger. They could describe me as a nigger. And you as a white person know that that word is not a good word. And so you as my ally or our allies would be to say, hey, that's something that I don't tolerate. That's something I don't want. It's not so much the face that you have in front of me. It's really when you're behind closed doors. That's the thing that I would hope that most white people understand, that what you do in your home, what you do in your circle, when you're on the golf course, when you're playing cards with your friends, when you're out together at restaurants, how do you see me? And what is that conversation about? And then you can come in and kind of steer that conversation in a more positive way.
Right. I really look forward to tonight to hear much more about that and many other topics that we will discuss. We have a great panel together. It's really good. Thank you so much, all panelists, for joining us tonight and sharing your experiences and your wisdom with us. The discussion is going to be moderated by Pastor David and his wife Pamela, but before turning to them, we're going to watch an introductory video about George Floyd.
It's a Monday evening in Minneapolis. Police respond to a call about a man who allegedly used a counterfeit $20 bill to buy cigarettes. 17 minutes later, the man they are there to investigate lies motionless on the ground and is pronounced dead shortly after. The man was 46-year-old George Floyd. a bouncer originally from Houston who'd lost his job at a restaurant when the coronavirus pandemic hit. Floyd's death triggered major protests in Minneapolis and sparked rage across the country. One of the officers involved, Derek Chauvin, has been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The other 3 officers have been charged with aiding and abetting murder. The Times analyzed bystander videos, security camera footage, and police scanner audio, spoke to witnesses and experts, and reviewed documents released by the authorities to build as comprehensive a picture as possible and better understand how George Floyd died in police custody.
Once again, greetings to everyone in attendance. Welcome to Racism 2020, Pathways to Taking Its Last Breath. We are honored to have a distinguished panel of a variety of experience spanning both from the United Kingdom and the United States. Today, we hope to give insights on racism based on current events, historic roots, systemic patterns, and pathways for elimination of racism. We hope that you will share your thoughts and your comments throughout the event. Now I will introduce my husband, Pastor David Stewart. He is senior pastor and founder of Destiny Preparation Church in Rochester, New York. He is also a businessman with over 25 years of management experience. He has a BS degree in chemistry and an MBA from the Rochester Institute of Technology.
And I'd like to say good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone that is on. We are honored to have an international audience along with an international panel today. So we have people all the way from the United Kingdom and perhaps even as far as Africa. In addition to that, we have other people that are calling and in viewing from the East Coast of the United States, along with the West Coast. So we're happy to have everyone involved with us. That video that you just saw, someone was asking, it was by Dietrich Haddon, the first part of it, the singing, and that is an available song that he has out right now that he wrote in response to this issue. Oh, we have somebody on from Hawaii as well, so welcome to all those that are on from various areas. I do want to introduce our panel. I want to start first of all with my wife, who has already spoken, so along with being wife of the Pastor Stewart and leader of the women's ministry at our church, Pamela is a professional educator of over 25 years of experience within the New York State education system. She's a behavioral specialist working with children from elementary through high school, has a BA in pre-law from the University of Syracuse and a BS in education from Western Governors. And my wife was saying also at the end of that clip was a very special piece of art that was drawn by Mikkel Kilgore, who is a very, very renowned, thank you,
yes,
artist, and has several different pieces. He made several, in fact, as a result of that incident. So this incident has clearly touched a lot of people, and we'll talk about that more in a moment. Let me introduce to you quickly the rest of the panel. So Pastor Lorraine Williams, Pastor Lorraine was already on. She is an associate pastor at the City of Refuge in Gardena, California. Pastor, if you want to come turn on your view so we can see you. Under the auspices of Bishop Noel Jones, there she is. She has a BA degree in behavioral science and music from CSU Beniguez Hills and a MA degree in religious studies from CSU Long Beach, a master's of divinity degree in Azusa Pacific University Seminary, and is currently working on her doctorate degree at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, which is the connection that we saw with Dr. Van Olman. This is Pastor Lorraine's affiliation that has resulted in our gathering today. So welcome to having her putting this together and also being a part of this team. I want to also reintroduce Dr. Leon Van Olman, who was on earlier. Dr. Van Olman is a lecturer in practical theology at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, UK, teaching in the area of liturgy, sacraments, disability, and pastoral theology. His research focuses on autism, liturgy, ritual, narrative, suffering, and reconciliation. And much of Leon's work is focused on pastoral needs, especially the needs of marginalized people who are stigmatized and whose voices are not heard. Thank you for allowing this to be put together. And we hope that it's going to be helpful to all that are involved. Also on the panel, the prestigious Dr. Georgiana Land is with us. She is our special commentator. And whether she, more so than she realized, she's going to participate tonight as well. She has an amazing background, but let me just share a little bit of it with you. Reverend Georgiana Land is an ordained minister with the African American Methodist Episcopal Church with background in both theology and philosophy, and a retired university professor with a PhD in policy planning and higher educational administration. She has a variety of experiences and achievements in administration, organizational development, and global intergovernmental relations. She served as a Franklin Fellow and Foreign Affairs Officer at the U.S. Department of State in the Secretary's Office. Wow. And of the Special Representative of Global Intergovernmental Affairs, and was responsible for designing strategies for integrating domestic and foreign subnational partnerships to move local governance and public service delivery at the international, national, and local levels. And that was me cutting it short, Dr. Land. Also want to welcome Reverend Dr. Andrew Draper, who's a senior pastor of Urban Light Community Church. He's a founding pastor along with being the senior pastor in Muncie, Indiana. He's committed to a ministry of reconciliation, justice, and community development. He has authored numerous books and articles on race, disability, and the church. Dr. Draper holds a PhD in theological ethics from the University of Aberdeen and a Master of Divinity from Weinbrenner Theological Seminary. Thank you for joining us. Pastor Dwayne Pursley is the pastor and founder of Open Arms Christian Fellowship in Los Angeles, California. He is the system care coordinator and works as a liaison between the incarcerated and the Los Angeles courts. Thank you, sir. Minister Joe Paul is a reentry specialist, seasoned professional with over 27 years of community service, working with ex-offenders, high-risk adults, and various community development and faith-based organizations. He served to develop and implement several reentry workforce programs in the pre and post-release stages of incarceration at the county jail, state, and federal prison levels. He's a commissioner for the Inmate Welfare Fund for LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva and serves as an advisor for the Sheriff's Community Advisory Committee in the Restorative Justice Program. Joseph is also an ordained minister, and for the past 10 years has served as the Director of Political and Civic Affairs for Bishop Noel Jones at the City of Refuge. Finally, Marcia Dixon is a journalist and a communications specialist who runs her own PR consultancy called Marcia Dixon Public Relations, specializing in helping churches, ministries, business, and organizations reach the Black Christian community, which is considered a most cohesive, wealthy, and educated and aspirational sector of Britain's African and Caribbean population. Ms. Dixon also has over 25 years of experience working as a journalist, specializing in religion and gospel music. She currently writes a column in the Voice newspaper and was former editor of Keep the Faith magazine, one of Britain's most influential publications about Black faith community. Now, also, Dr. Anthony Reddy was scheduled to be with us. Unfortunately, he had a personal commitment issue that came up that he had to address and was not able to join us today. So sorry that he's not present with us, but happy to have all of those that are. Once again, welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us on our panel today. So now we're going to jump into our conversation. We have quite a bit to cover today, and we want to try and do as much justice as we can in the conversation. We're going to have a couple different segments, and throughout we're going to have a couple of breaks as well. So why don't we get started in our first question of the day?
Okay. In the midst of the pandemic, racism has rapidly escalated to the top of the worldwide stage. Why has this issue why has it become so relevant right now? Pastor Williams and Dr. Draper, would you like to address that question?
Sure. First of all, the pandemic put us all at home. We had to stay in shelter or quarantine, if you will. And what that did was allow people to watch more television, watch more Instagram, their social media. They were more on their social media than they would be if they were in their offices. And because of that, they saw George Floyd killed in real time. And it sent a shockwave to not only this country, but all over the world. And because of that, it put a face on racism. It brought it to the forefront. Also with the pandemic, you have African Americans who don't have healthcare. They have more than one comorbidities. And that just put another face, if you will, in the forefront of racism. That is something that is mind-boggling in this country, in these United States of America, but yet here we are.
I would agree with Pastor Williams. The ubiquity of technology and the chance for people to be a bit on pause for a moment allows for the world to see things as they really are. So George Floyd's death was not so much an aberration or a unique experience as much as it was a very public, obvious, visual experience that people watching who may not think about the impact of racism and the racialized imagination on people's lived experience suddenly are forced to deal with it, right? So you've got cell phone cameras now. When you didn't, 20 years ago, not everyone was carrying around that technology on their bodies. And so many African-American activists have been saying for years the way that policing has tended to function in the United States through the legacy, right, of slave patrols and property ownership and protection and so on and so forth. So the fact is that the protests are not so much about George Floyd alone, but the protests are about, okay, now we have sort of the kindling that the match can light.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Absolutely. So, Pastor Pursley, can you describe, this situation? How is the death of George Floyd ignited this issue of racism? What's different about this versus what's been happening in the past? And just want to say to the audience as well that we're going to expand this as well into the United Kingdom in just a moment. But we do, this incident appears to have lit something worldwide, and we want to talk about really where that starts.
Well, you also have to look at the recent events that led up to this, with so many killings of African Americans by police officers. There were still individuals in this country that sided with the police, no matter how obvious it would seem. And so the question would come, well, they must have done something. They had to do something for that to happen to them, which actually justified what the police had done in so many prior cases. But as Pastor Lorraine stated, and even Dr. Draper, when the George Floyd incident happened, it then became undeniable. You could not rationalize the event And so if you now find yourself in a position to where you cannot deny it, the next question comes up is the why. What is it about this society that a Caucasian white police officer feels like it's okay to do what he did to George Floyd in broad daylight while he knew he was on cell phone video, while the other officers was holding back the crowd, while the crowd was begging him to stop, yet and still he felt empowered to continue to do what he did. For what was it, 8 minutes and 46 seconds? That is a very long time. And the time element did not really grasp my psyche until they televised George Floyd's funeral. And remember, the funeral went silent for the whole duration. And that was a long time just to sit there with nothing going on. And so when you look at the why, that's where the issues of racism began to come to surface. And so for the first time, we now have more activists of many different races who have stepped up to the plate and began to protest because it was undeniable.
And it wasn't just this one incident, in fact, you know, and the why is something certainly we're going to get back into as we go deeper into this conversation. But again, setting the stage, which became apparently a worldwide explosion, if you will, of attention. Minister Paul, perhaps you can jump into this conversation and share a little bit of other things that may have been going on in and around this time that expanded this whole kind of view and attention.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to participate. And thank you for the thoughts that have already been shared around this conversation. To me, I mean, it's quite obvious.
Mr. Paul, if you could speak up just a little bit louder.
Yeah, there were several situations, and it would be a litany of names to beat off that speak to the accumulation of the, I would use the word usurpation of law, that people have just taken full advantage of the indemnification that our justice system has played against law enforcement, and you basically have a get out of jail free card with remote justification. It doesn't have to be even rational justification of killing unarmed Black people. And, you know, in some parts of the conversation, you'll find that people have grown just accustomed to it almost, and others are silently being filled with rage at the result of this treatment consistently across the whole country. It's not just isolated to parts of the country. It's just, to what Dr. Draper said, it's a ubiquitous experience for us as African-American men, for sure. And I could probably say Lorraine would have the same sentiment as a Black woman. And so I think, you know, the accumulation of things, it's only so much. You know, they say that pressure busts the pipe. And I think that this George Floyd experience was, to what everyone else has already addressed, just the straw that broke the camel's back. I do think that COVID-19 was a strong contributor to the economic impacts that we're experiencing, and seeing the racial and economic disparities from that outcome. It just was a perfect storm of circumstances with restorative justice, social justice, economic justice, and all the other inequities that we are experiencing, all culminating with what Pastor Pursley has said, you know, 8 minutes plus of a knee on a person's neck with no justification of him resisting. It just all culminated to create what we're experiencing now, and hopefully, you know, through our conversation today, bring at least some light to aspects of it.
How have the scenes in the U.S. impacted racial tensions within the United Kingdom? Ms. Dixon, could you answer that?
Well, they've impacted people here in the UK quite a bit. Obviously, like everybody else throughout the world, we were traumatized by watching George Floyd die before our very eyes. I mean, you know, I've been hearing men say that black men here saying that they were actually traumatized actually watching that, as well as obviously women as well, but it was traumatic and it just stirred up anger. Over here in the UK, we've got a sizable black population comprised mainly of people from the Caribbean who immigrated over here starting in 1948 on a ship called the Windrush, and during the 1950s and 60s loads of people arrived in the UK from the Caribbean at the invitation of the British government. And we've also got quite a number of Africans, mainly from West Africa, that's Nigeria and Ghana, who came here in large numbers from the 1980s for work and educational opportunities. I'm just giving you a little bit of background of the size of the community. So we were actually traumatized, we were angry, and over here we've got the backdrop of what's been called the Windrush Scandal, whereby Black Caribbean people who were invited here in the 1950s and 60s, the first generation and some of their children were basically told that they did not have the right papers and were either deported back to the Caribbean where they've got no family because obviously they've made their roots here, and couldn't work, you know, had to rely on friends for money, basically lost everything, lost their work. So there's been a lot of anger around that. So watching what happened to George Floyd on TV, as people have said, there's a pandemic, people have been inside, people want to get out. You see this, you know, this major injustice on television and people want to act. And over here, the Black Lives Matter protests that took place in central London were actually organised predominantly by young teenage people who were very, very angry about what had happened. And for me, because I'm a religious journalist, what surprised me during this whole thing was the outpouring of hurt and anger that there was on social media. It was like this event gave people the opportunity to voice the racism that they had been experiencing over the years. So during that time when there was all those protests, every day, because I'm a bit of a social media junkie, okay? Every day that I went onto social media, somebody would be sharing some aspects about racism that they had experienced, whether at work, whether at school, whether as a young person. And it's just kind of the whole Black Lives Matter movement has just kind of galvanized Black people over here. To really voice their opinion about racism and also to protest, sorry, my voice has gotten a bit, to protest about what they see happening. Sorry about that. My voice went a bit, but yeah, it's just galvanized people. People are angry. People want action. People want to do things, and they want to see change in the structures in British society with regards to how Black people are treated.
Thank you. Now, there's a question that's come in that I want to tie into this because I think it's very relevant. The question says, a white cop was on Floyd's neck. What does the fact that he was covered by an Asian cop tell us about the social context of racism in the US? And I'm going to point this to you, Dr. Draper. Is racism just a black-white thing, or is it something deeper than that?
Yeah, so I think it would be helpful to distinguish between what we mean, and I know that the question will be coming later, how do we define racism, but to distinguish between racial animus or prejudice and the system of racism as constituted by white supremacy that we're experiencing in the West. So any person can be prejudiced toward another person, but the system of white supremacy that we are speaking of when we use the word racism is a system that was specifically and explicitly founded on anti-Blackness. So the racialized hierarchy that was constructed through colonization, the transatlantic slave trade, the age of exploration, immigration to the United States, the Native American genocide, all of the racial categories that were being introduced into in and through all of those events were holding up a racialized taxonomy with white on top, black on bottom, and defining the personhood of people based on skin color somewhere in between. So anti-Blackness is by no means limited to people who are phenotypically, you know, melanin challenged as I am, right? You know, the system of racism and white supremacy is sort of self-perpetuating. So even within various African-American communities, you can find the stain that whiteness has left on our collective imagination, so that people with lighter skin or more European features might be favored in certain ways, and that comes back to the way that the slave plantations worked, you know, with certain people held in the house and others in the field, and on and on and on. So the regime of whiteness has created notions about what is true, good, and beautiful that perpetuates anti-Blackness. And so it doesn't really matter whether what color your skin is, if you have been habituated and discipled into that manner of which I would suggest the media and our families and theology and the way that we've thought about who people are has inculcated that in us. So if we have been discipled into that way of thinking, my skin color is secondary to my participation in the regime of anti-Blackness. And I think that's what we saw on display. It, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're white, Asian, or even an African-American police officer, if you are participating in that system in a way that assumes certain things about people of color and practices on those assumptions, then you are part of the regime of white supremacy.
So then it's really more about differentiation versus true color, isn't it? It's about identifying you as different than me, or separate from me in some way.
Yeah, I mean, there's no easy answer there, because how do we get to saying that race is not a thing and yet it really matters? Right? White and black, we know there's no biological specificity to those kind of constructs, right? But at the same time, we live in a racialized world where those constructs have shaped our thinking for 500 years. So there's really, you know, it's not just about difference. It's also about a systematic way of othering brown and black bodies in a way that leads to their perpetual marginalization.
We're actually going to come back to this issue right after the break, but we have one last question before the break for Dr. Land.
Yes, Dr. Land. How are the protests of today similar or different from those of the past? Has anything changed?
Thank you so very much. I think when I think back of the past, and I'm remembering my days in college when Rosa Parks sat on a bus because she was tired and refused to get up.
Exactly.
And that started a movement that even drove Dr. Martin Luther King and others around to really say enough is enough, because they really was not a fair thing to do. During that time, we also had children being killed in Sunday schools, more racial hate against people, policemen putting dogs on children as trying to enter into school. And we, as college students at that time, felt this is something we should get involved in too, because we felt it. My memory at that point went back to Emmett Till. I was a child, and I remember when he was killed, and the pictures in the newspaper, we run every time to see what else did they say about him. And so it started a racial divide and fight that was very strong in the country at that point, and draw young people in who said, we too have to get into this fight. So the recent incident of George Floyd grabbed our attention when a 17-year-old girl, young lady, used her cell phone to capture a video that clearly showed George Floyd as he was being murdered by a white policeman, while 3 or 4 others stood by, held the crowd at bay, and people in around could not do anything to help him. So as people watched this murder taking place in front of their own eyes, it did not take long for this real image to be shown across our television screen, as someone just mentioned, that we were home due to pandemic issues. But across the nation, CNN, across the world, I mean, you could just see. So wherein before we could say that maybe something else happened, he might have provoked, there was no excuse for that. So you had these 2 incidents, I believe, brought us closer together to understand there was some clear injustices that's taken place against Black people. So Dr. Martin Luther King, if I can go back to him at this point in his call for equal rights, calling us together for a civil rights movement, we found that college students joined in and decided they're going to help. And it did not take long for college students and young adults to really recognize that we have to get involved. You had people like John Lewis, who was in college at this point, Julian Bond, you had Stokely Carmichael, and they all started with, what can we do? And they started a movement to bring young people together to resist. So you had the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, you had the Black Panthers, and they worked together, and out of that group became some very strong leaders. Congressman Lewis is now a member of Congress, but he's been a loud voice for us to ask for equal justice across the world, but especially in America. Today, as we think about this, it's rolling very fast at this moment, where young people too got involved. While we were saying that maybe, let's think about this, they did not hear that. They saw injustice and they started Black Life Matters. They could say that because I, and many of us my age, we have taught our youngsters that we've given them a right to go to major universities, go to the minor universities, and that they were, if you do well, you will have an equal right, you will have an equal chance as anybody else, and they believed us. So they worked hard, they did the right thing, and they saw that the injustice still continued. And so now they are asking, we don't want this anymore, and we want to stop to this. And they really believe that Black life matters. And so it brought an attention to people, not only in the United States, but around the world, that see, this is not right. It is not fair. One of the things that bothers me, especially when it comes to theology in the church, we will have what is called a majority, or the far right, call themselves major majorities, will sit and will demand the Congress and the Supreme Court will take action to save lives for unborn babies. And I have nothing against saving lives for unborn babies. That is really something I would have hold very dear to my heart. However, at the same time, the same groups will not open their mouth or share one voice, and will even get angry when you talk that Black lives matters. So we have some issues in the beginning, starting when we started with the civil rights movement years ago. Those same issues are still here with us now. But the response from our younger generation is much stronger, and they don't care at this moment, even if we have a pandemic going on and should be afraid for Corona COVID-19. It is so important to them that they would risk their lives to go out because this is not right, and they want to make a difference. So they're ringing a clarion call, and we are joining them. When I saw, I said to my son, I sent him a text. I saw he said something. He was so angry, he couldn't know that he could even deal with this at this George Floyd's funeral. And I wrote him a note, and I says, you know, maybe we just kind of try to suck it up. He wrote me back. He said, I don't love you that much. And I said, what do you mean you don't love me that much? He said, I am not giving up for you or anybody else what is happening to us today. He said, Mom, I have to fight for this. And I can understand that. And I had to write him back and says, I understand. I will join you in this fight because I see exactly where you're coming from. So there's a whole lot we have to look at, but we really must be clear that what happened then and what's happening now is different. And I would like to end this section by saying that we also have a different attitude of the leadership of the country at the time. During the time of the Civil Rights Movement, we had President Johnson, who had to stand over our country and lead us right after we had lost our beloved President Kennedy, racial unrest, children trying to get into school, Bill Connor putting dogs on children, and he decided, what can I do? He took a chance and called this nation to come in together now, and he gave us a right to say, I'm going to put legislation together to help to integrate our schools and to also help to understand that make this a great society. The current officer in the White House at this moment has taken a totally different, if you're looking at what's happening, view of the issues in front of us when this country is in turmoil. We do have a pandemic that is wreaking havoc around the world. We have George Floyd, whose death, several other people recently who've been killed in a very similar manner. And this president is fanning a flame of racism and calling people different kinds of names. So you have two different views when you have a country who's going through so very much, especially when it comes to racial relation and the racial divide for us, not only in America, but around the world. And I think that's where we see that there's some similarities, but also some great differences. And we can no longer stand aside and watch. We must kind of react and respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lang. That was excellent. We have a whole lot more to come, and we're going to take a break in a moment, but I want to tell people we have quite a bit more. I realize everybody's probably not going to be on for the whole thing, but if you know someone who you think would benefit from the conversation, because we have a lot more to go, I just want to let you know you can still invite them and have them go to that registration page, and they'll be able to get in because we've got a lot more coming. So we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll be right back with more.
Brixton, South London, 1981. A howl of rage against the police. Britain, like America, has a long history of racial tensions. Last weekend, thousands of people marched in London in solidarity with American protesters. But there are George Floyds here too. The names on the signs are Black Britons who have died after encounters with the police here. In 2011, anger erupted on the streets of the capital after the shooting of Mark Duggan, a 29-year-old who was shot and killed while police tried to arrest him on suspicion of planning an attack and possessing a gun. The disturbances left London burning for several days. It's been 20 years since the Macpherson report examined how police handled the Stephen Lawrence case, a defining moment which exposed institutional racism within a police force. Searing inequality persists. Today, black people are 40 times more likely to be stopped and searched in the UK. More than half of the inmates held in prisons for young people in England and Wales are from a black and minority ethnic background. And amid the rage over George Floyd's death, confirmation that black people are disproportionately at risk from coronavirus. George Floyd! Protesters here and in America say no one should be in any doubt. Inequality and racism is a matter of life or death. Brixton, South London, 1981. A howl of rage against the police. Britain, like America, has a long history of racial tensions. Last weekend, thousands of people marched in London in solidarity with American protesters. But there are George
Now listen to me. Call the person that was coming to get you. Tell them they don't need to come. All right? Yes. Okay? So go ahead and call them. I'm going to take you to jail, and I'm going to impound the car.
Before that, she needs to...
No.
I can't call them if you don't open the door.
Why can't you?
Because I will not put my...
Use your phone. It's in your lap right there.
I just don't want to put my hands down. I'm really sorry. I'm just...
You're just really wrong.
No. I've just been way too many videos of problems.
But you're not black. Remember, we only kill black people. Yeah, we only kill black people, right? All the videos you've seen, have you seen any white people get killed? You have.
That video was from an actual stop of someone, and it just suggests that there are differences that sometimes we don't always see. We had a question that came in that speaks, and we have some very good questions coming in. We have one that speaks to the roots and the history of racism, and that actually is the section that we're going into now. I want to start it with an open question to the panel as we talk about this. We've talked a lot already, but before we go any further, perhaps we should actually put a definition to racism. So I want to ask the panel if anybody wants to speak to this. What do you feel racism actually is? Let's build that out a little bit more.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
Well, for me, it's my own personal definition, but I see racism about power. It's about one group of people using their power to keep another group of people down. In the case of what we're experiencing now, it's white people have set up a structure that oppresses the black population. And for me, that's racism. It's all about power, and it's how somebody uses that power.
Anybody else? Thank you.
I think I would like to add a little thought to it. And again, this is my personal opinion, but looking at the comparison between our UK brothers and sisters and America, you know, there were so many of these ideas of social hierarchy and capitalism in its form back then, with the bourgeois, with the proletariats, with the serfs, with all these different class systems that just made it very simple to dehumanize people. And then you find a free or a low threshold workforce that can continue to perpetuate your wealth and the distinctions what that wealth creates. I do agree, it's a power move. And the fact that, you know, nations were invaded, continents were invaded, and people were enslaved to perpetuate that power base through colonialism and all the other things that went into it. It's evolved into what we call it today, but it's been a very systemic and entrenched concept throughout our existence as human beings in a civil sense. So I do agree, power is a fundamental base. Wealth, in the unequal distribution of that wealth really fuels racism, in my opinion.
You also have...
Go ahead. Let me just say, so colonization, as an example, has had an impact on that, right? Where one country has, for whatever reason, come in to colonize another country. I think there's perhaps an an automatic deferral of differentiation and level between them as a result of that. And we've seen that happen throughout the world. Pastor Lorraine?
Yes, very short statement. I also think racism has that passivity, or it's passive. You don't actually see it. You don't actually know it. You can't actually put your finger on it, but you know it's there. I've had that experience in my job, where I've gotten the job and everything seems to be okay, and then all of a sudden I don't have the job anymore. I'm a freelance interpreter. So when I go into the hospitals or I go into various appointments, they don't know who I am because I work through an agency, and I don't know who they are. But I can walk into a room and you can have, it's the look. There's a commercial out there called The Look. They know nothing about me, but because of my ebony skin, immediately they feel that I am not competent to do the job that I have been sent to do. And a lot of times we'll get pulled off of a job. There's been times where I've had my white counterpart that will say, oh, I can't interpret with her. She doesn't know what she's doing. And I found that out through a mutual deaf person who then told me later on she didn't understand why I was not her interpreter. For those of you who don't know, I'm an interpreter for the deaf. That's my trade. And it was mind-boggling to me because she and I knew each other very well. And she wanted me as her interpreter. And my white counterpart went to the office and told them to take me off of the job. When I asked the office, they said, oh, there was another interpreter that had wanted that job and we had promised him to him. You know, these little varying kind of answers that I'm like, So it's the passivity that we have to deal with also. It's not always so direct, it's not always so systemic, but it can be that undercurrent that you go, okay, that's racism.
I don't mean to belabor the subject, because I know we have to move on, but I had to throw this in about the undercurrent, because there are certain sections in town in Los Angeles where you walk around constantly with the elephant in the room, okay? And so, and the overall attitude is, what are you here? Why are you here? What are you doing here? Let me give you just an everyday example. You know, me being a big black man, when I walk in the door, everyone stops, looks, and tries to adjust whether or not I am a threat. Okay, and so therefore, with that already in play, the minute I walked in the door, security is already alerted. I laugh. I've gotten so now that I tease them. I say, if you're undercover security, you're not doing a good job because I know who you are. And I laugh. But that should not be. Now, here's the next step. What if I have to assert myself in any way? Now the good guy is on the verge of going 8 because we have a big black man who has asserted himself. So am I just supposed to stand in line and let people continue to cut me off? Or is it okay if the big black man says, excuse me, ma'am, I was next? Okay, that's fine, right? Okay, but why is security there? The minute I said, excuse me, everything stopped. Even the checker stopped checking. Everybody looked. The conversations going on around me has stopped. People did not believe me. I said, okay, watch this. And I would bring them in there and I would tell them, observe this. And I got my groceries, I got everything, whatever. And I'll say, excuse me. And everything stops just like I predicted. And then I'll play it off and I'll say, do you have a restroom? I didn't need to use the restroom. I wanted to prove something to somebody. And so these are the undertone of racism in society. Pastor Lorraine is laughing because I've done it with her in the past. And so I don't know how we combat them. That has to be a discussion that happens between the races. And it is what it is. I've learned to do it. I should not have to take so much tenor out of my voice. I'm growly. I'm a big, burly, growly man. I should not have to practice taking some of the growl out of my voice just so I would not be perceived as a threat. Because the threat, we all know, can escalate to death. So that is the undertone and the elephant that's in the room. And we haven't even gone to other aspects of racism, but that is one that we live with 24 hours a day.
We're absolutely going to talk more about that in the next session, in the section as well. Got another question for Pastor Draper, for Dr. Draper.
Okay. We know that racism in the United States ties back to slavery. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that still remains today?
That's a wonderful question. We see a pattern in American history where anytime there are strides made toward racial justice, the system rights itself and works backward. So, for instance, after the Emancipation Proclamation, right, during Reconstruction, there was never a national reckoning with slavery. It was just sort of like, well, it's outlawed. Now we'll reconstruct the Confederates' lands. We'll give the property that was given to freed African Americans back to slave owners. You know, that's where we get the 40 acres and a mule thing that came from a field order and then was taken back by Lincoln's successor. And then you have, you know, a period of 70 to 80 years of racialized terror where through sharecropping and lynching and other means of social control, slavery was basically, for all intents and purposes in many places in the country still practiced. And then, you know, the Great Migration of freed African Americans north to urban areas to get industrial jobs, and then white flight and deindustrialization and all those sort of things. You know, we're not even touching yet on Jim Crow in the South, right? But Dr. Land spoke of the civil rights movement that helped to push back against some of those inequities in the formalized system of segregation of American apartheid. But then you very quickly had the system then, in a sense, try to right itself back to racialized social control through mechanisms like the war on drugs, so that communities of color and low-income communities, many who were communities made up of people who had migrated north in the Great Migration looking for freedom and land ownership and work and those sort of things. Now, you know, we even see the way that slavery was outlawed through the 13th Amendment. Now people can come into communities of color and have targeted policing and different levels of disparity in sentencing for drug crimes that are basically equal across all ethnic groups. And now what we have is the modern mass incarceration system where, you know, in the United States, 1 out of 3 African American men will be incarcerated in their lifetimes, and only 1 out of 10 white men. And the majority of that is not for violent crime. The majority of that is for drug use, which statistically is even across ethnic groups, if not slightly higher among white folks. And so we see that the disparity in sentencing, the disparity in targeted policing and mass incarceration has just continued forward slavery by legal means, so that today we can have more African American men incarcerated than were enslaved 170 years ago.
Wow, thank you. That's powerful.
Yes.
I know everybody's biting at the bit. I know you're biting at the bit, but we have so much to cover. I want to keep going on this because I want to hear Marcy. I want her to talk about similarities and differences between what the experience of racism in the United States versus the United Kingdom. We want to bring that into the conversation.
Well, I think the difference in terms of what happens here in the UK, firstly, whilst many of the people that, Black people that are in Britain are either from Africa or the Caribbean, the way that we came to Britain is different. So Black people of Caribbean origin, as stated earlier, they were actually invited here by the British government in the 1950s because they had a labour shortage of people working in industries like on the buses and the National Health Service. So we never came to Britain as slaves. We came as people who were members of what's called the Commonwealth, and we came to a country where we felt we were going to be embraced with open arms. And when we arrived here, we found that was not the case. You know, I hear stories of the first generation who came to the UK. I'm second generation, and they will say things like, you know, when they went to look for places to live, you know, there'd be signs that would say no Blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So they found it very, very difficult to find places to live. They also found that decent jobs weren't available to them. They couldn't apply. Well, they could apply for them, but you know, really they were here getting kind of very low-paid jobs. The racism over here is much more subtle than it is in America. I'm just going by what I see. In America, it seems very stark. You know, we hear of things like rednecks. You know, the police carry guns. They do not do that over here. It's only recently that the police have been armed, which is partly due to the rise in terrorist incidents. And they've also been armed with what's called tasers. But statistically, from what I've seen, Black people are more likely to be tasered than their white counterparts. In terms of the Black prison population, Black people are disproportionately in prison compared to their white counterparts. And like in the States, we will get longer sentence for crimes that our white counterparts commit. And the racism is rampant through all the structures that we have in society. So it's there in education, it's there in the mental health services, it's there in employment. You know, even people who graduate from, Black people who graduate from university, they are less likely to get a job that matches their qualifications. And if they have a Black African name, they are even less likely to get a job. Saying all that, as we know, racism is nuanced, isn't it? So even though, you know, we know that people and there will be obstacles for people to move on, we do know that we do have people who get prominent positions, who get employed, get top jobs. You know, just recently we've had, you know, Black people in high office in the police service, not as many as we would like, but people are breaking through. What has been happening and what people have been saying to me in terms of the whole employment thing is that following the incident with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters protests, some employers have been connecting with their Black employees to find out if they're happy. Some have been sending around memos to say we are not racist. Some are looking at having anti-racist training. So I think what's happened subtly, what's been happening is that the white population or people that have had power some are rethinking how they do what they do. Some are reaching out to their Black employees in a way that they never reached out to them before. So there's kind of change. It seems like it's coming. I don't know how quick it's going to come, but it just seems for this present moment in time, effort is being made to connect with some employers, for instance, are making making effort to connect with their Black employees in a different way. The police just recently, just yesterday actually, an athlete was stopped by the police. She was, her and her partner and their child were manhandled, whereas before it would be reported in the news and kind of you'd forget about it. The day after it was reported, the police have issued an apology to this athlete. I believe her name is Bianca Williams. So there's kind of, it just seems like there's a bit of a sea change happening. I don't know how long it's gonna happen, but I think the whole George Floyd thing, the whole Black Lives Matter thing, it's just getting people to think about race in a different way, and people are trying to reconnect or connect with Black people in a different way.
Definitely. I think there's certainly a lot of realignments. Part of what you said, someone was asking a question about whether there are more incidents or whether the social climate is shifting. Do we have more incidents, or are there just more things being videotaped? We've certainly seen an impact of that as well. That's a perfect segue, by the way, what you were saying, into the clip that we're about to show next. But before we do that, I want to read something that someone shared, and this goes back to what Pastor Pursley was speaking about when he was talking about the way he's treated just based on the way that he looks. This comment says, "I know exactly what this man means. I used to work with a Black guy, and when we would go on an assignment, he used to sound like a gay man. After about 3 visits, I asked him about it, and he told me it made him less threatening to company execs he was meeting with. How terrible what some of us must endure to get the work done." So on that note, we're going to take a break, and this is going to talk just a little bit longer of a clip than some of the others, but it's a really good overview to bring on the conversation about systemic racism and bias. So we're going to watch this clip, and we'll be right back.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by
Okay, 1 second, everyone. Looks like we're having a bit of a technical difficulty.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities. Kevin and Jamal live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents. Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire Black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny Black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce. Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04. A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have. Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the only student from his high school to get accepted into a great university, the same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment, even among college graduates today. You can see evidence of systemic racism in every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism. Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases. What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today. As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start, so that poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
Okay, hopefully that was helpful to people, insightful to people. That's a nice little preparation into where we're headed next, because now we're dealing with more of the subtle levels of racism versus the obvious and the slavery and things like that we've been talking about. And before you, I just want to ask our panel, time is moving on us, so I'm going to ask the panel to please try and keep our responses to 2 minutes or less. All right, with that in mind, let's jump back into it. We're going right to Pastor Lorraine.
Okay. Okay, Pastor Lorraine, why is it that racism never seems to die?
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
There we go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. This is going to be a very simple answer. It's perpetuated generation after generation after generation. It is taught. Children don't come here with a racist mind. I don't know if many of you saw the YouTube video where the little white boy and the little black boy, they look like they're about 2 years old, and they're running towards each other and they hug each other. They don't know black or white. They just know they like each other. You know, and that's the way God created us. Imago Dei. We are created in his image, all of us. God does not see color, and neither do children. So it has to be taught, and then it's perpetuated generation after generation. So it is incumbent to our white brothers and sisters to deprogram that. I can't go into someone's white home and tell them how to run their household. But mom and dad can teach their sons and daughters that when they're around their little groups and they see the racism starting there, to to say that's not how we do things. That's not who we are. And until that happens, it's going to continue to perpetuate.
Thank you for that answer.
That was a short answer.
That was keeping it brief. I want to set the stage for another question. I'm going to point this to Dr. Land, but I want to set the stage for the preface of this because, we've talked a little bit earlier and we've talked behind the scenes about the aspect of dominance and how dominance ties into racism. And, we said earlier about colonialism. It often seems that one nationality people overtakes another. Racism becomes a natural factor of dominance. And typically, a first world country or a highly developed country assumes a dominance over a lesser developed country. The question now, if that's true, is can equality be reclaimed by those who have been dominated in the past through colonialism or slavery or whatever aspect? How does someone who has been on the opposite side of that reclaim themselves or reclaim their position? And if so, how and what does it depend on? Dr. Land.
First of all, racism or racialism is a belief system. You have to believe, and they do believe, that there's one group that is superior to the other group, okay? And so whether it's from a biological sense, and also believe that one group is not as intelligent or does not have the quality or skills necessary to be as superior to or equal to a particular group. That's number one. So what we have to do is the entire behavioral system must change in order for you to know that I am intellectually equal to you and I'm not put down because of my skin color. I'm gonna get back and answer your question in a minute, but as I listened to Marcia talk just now, I remember I was invited to go to England by the United Nations to participate in a conference with 40 other people from around the world. I think there were 8 people from the United States, and there were only 2 people of color, and I was one of them. When I arrived at Heathrow Airport, all excited about going to stay at Windsor, the Queen's Windsor Castle, Windsor Palace, that's where we were staying. When I arrived there, I was told when I got off the plane, the agent takes a look at my form and says, "Where are you staying?" I said, "I'm staying at St. George Hotel at Windsor." He says, "Madam, you don't stay at Windsor, you go to visit Windsor." I said, "I am staying at Windsor for a conference." And when I looked, there were about 3 other guys that came up. I guess he pushed a button or something, let them know that we have one crazy Black woman here saying she's going to stay at Windsor. So he said to me, I believe he was a supervisor, "Do you have some proof or evidence?" So I said, "I most certainly do. May I pull out my laptop?" Show them my invitation. Oh, madam, I'm so sorry. They couldn't believe that I was going to Windsor. Now, they said I couldn't stay there. However, when I got to Windsor, I asked some of the others, the 2 white counterparts that I know from New York, where they stopped and said they couldn't. No one else was asked if they knew they couldn't stay at Windsor but me. So it's a belief system. Just by seeing me, you think that I am less than or does not measure up to being equal to. When I say I want to claim it, no one gives up anything. I remember when I went to Robert Kennedy's house once, I looked on his shelf and he had so many books that had the word power in it. And I questioned him about it. He says, "No one gives up power." He says, once you have it, you hold on to it and the other person must seize it or take it. And I remember that. So it's the same thing when you say that, are they going to give it up? No. you have to take it. You have to find a way to encourage people to change their way of thinking about who you are and where you fall into relationship with them. I hope I answered your question. The other one was that, oh, I saw they send you these little things around. Somebody would clip and send you a little video. And this little boy says he did not want to be a Negro when he grows up. So the teacher asked him why. And the conversation went with little boy looked at his teacher and says, would you rather live to be 100 as a Negro or live to be 50 as a white person? That really made you stop to think. And so the teacher could not, she did not want to answer his question. So when you think about, do they give it up and what do we really want to have? Do you want to walk in my shoes as considered less than power for a longer time or have more power for a shorter time? I think most people will take having the comforts and enjoyment of being white instead of looking at themselves to being Black. I don't care what you may think. So it's not given, it's an opportunity. You have to really work and seize it. And we must come together to get people to understand that it's not just because you are white, it makes you more superior than I am, than I'm Black. And
thank you. That was deep response. Very good. Appreciated it. I have a bomb question I'm going to drop in on you guys at some point because there's a question that came in on the Q&A that it's a bomb. I'm going to drop it in, but I'm going to hold on to that for a minute. Right now, I want to go to Pastor Pursley, and I have a question for you, and then we'll go to Dr. Draper on another one. But white privilege, let's talk about white privilege and systemic racism a bit. White privilege is a term that speaks of assumed benefits or advantages based on skin color. Is this a real thing, or does everyone truly have equal opportunities? Pastor Pursley, let's speak about that. You have to come off mute first.
All righty. Yes, white privilege is definitely a true thing. And I was speaking with someone about this earlier this week.
We're still not hearing you for some reason.
You cannot hear me.
There you go.
Okay.
Now we hear you.
All righty. I was saying, yes, white privilege is definitely a real thing, and yes, it definitely still exists. And I was speaking with another minister friend of mine earlier this week about it, and so we were looking up what some of the sociologists said and versus our own experience. And something that really stuck out with me concerning the definition, when it said that it is an unearned right. See, and so white supremacy, I said supremacy, but I meant privilege, is basically an unearned right that one has that benefits them solely because of the color of their skin. And so it's the expectation that goes along with that. There are certain expectations that go along with this privilege. And we experience it all the time. In social settings, we experience it with the police. We experience it in neighborhoods and things of that nature. My father, he moved us out of a predominantly Black community into a predominantly white community. And for him back in the early 60s, that was his badge of success, And by the time they began to unload the truck, all of the front yards was filled with the residents of that street because they were watching the Black folks move in. And it was almost as if you're not supposed to be able to afford to live here. And so if you can afford to move into this home in this area, then I must be able to afford to live in a better home in a better neighborhood. So I need to start checking on my options of moving. And so that is something that has gone on from generation to generation. And so when it comes to that, the systemic racism comes in, and it's just there, it's tangible. It's on every job I've ever had, you know, and that's just the way it is. I've experienced it based on the car that I drive. I've experienced it based on the neighborhoods that I lived. And so it's very strong, and it very much so exists. And so I was listening to Dr. Land, and I don't mean to take up so much time, I'm sorry, but Dr. Land, you really struck me and brought a new perspective when you said that power is not given, you have to take it. And so I'm now left with a conversation of how do you go about taking power when you have so many barriers around you. And to kick down barriers sometimes can actually put you in a position to where you cross the line. Does anybody understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
How do you differentiate? I don't mean to take over the discussion, but I'm stuck.
Well, I think you're asking a good point, and it leads into going back to that comment of if you can't take it away. I would think that a lot of what has been done over time in protests may not have the power to take it away, but it is the motivation for people to give up some of that power. In other words, what is it that we can accomplish through protesting? You can't, through protesting, make somebody give up power, but you can set enough disturbance or enough incentive for them to be willing to give up some pieces of it, or at least appear to give up some pieces of it. So I want to get Dr. Draper involved in the conversation. I want to continue on in terms of white privilege. I know, Dr. Draper, you have a lot of experience as Pastor Pursley was just talking about gentrification and things like that happen in different areas. And so I want to pick up on, again, white privilege, but also systemic racism and the things that have been done along this lines of what we're talking about, that have been done to try and eliminate white privilege and systemic racism. Some people would say that there have been laws that have been created, there have been things that have already been established, and some people, in fact, will say it's already been taken care of. But is that a true statement? Is that real? Is there more to be done? Can you pick it up from there?
Sure, thank you. Would you like me to speak more toward the white privilege end or the systemic racism end?
Wherever you feel right now to continue or jump in on the conversation.
Well, let me just say then first, for white folks, we have to learn from, listen to, and submit to leaders of color if we're going to be serious about challenging the racialized imagination. Because if we don't do that, the best we will be pursuing is not reconciliation in any thick sense of that term, but instead just assimilation, right? I mean, that's the way most of us as white Christians have been trained to think. We think about reconciliation as inviting more people of color to our events that we're in charge of, or having a bit more diversity at the table that we don't ask who owns the table, right? So I think it's imperative, you know, I mean, being involved in community development and reconciliation and justice work for 16 years now, you know, I started with probably much more of a white savior kind of paternalistic attitude, just because that's how we as white men are socialized and raised. You know, there are still moments where my privilege or fragility, you know, sneaks out if I say something stupid or I don't see the, you know, consequences of an idea that I introduced or an action that I took, right? Like, I still need to be called on things regularly. And I think as long as we as white folks are defensive and do not allow ourselves to be corrected, and as long as we listen to and learn from resources written by people that look like us, and as long as we're involved in ecclesial structures that are led by people who share the same power and privilege that we do, I mean, all of those things work together to create a sort of impenetrable and self-perpetuating system. So, you know, adding a little bit of quote unquote diversity to the mix doesn't do anything to change. It just makes people tokens. It makes people, you know, have to, you know, then there's the burden on every person of color in predominantly white spaces to speak for all people of color or to educate white folks. You know, I mean, in our context, this is happening so often lately where well-meaning white Christians are going to the, you know, they're all jumping on the one black person they know and asking, you know, how do I fix this? How do I solve this? How do I think differently? And so African Americans right now are not only being called, you know, are not only trying to stand up under racialized oppression and injustice, deal with trauma, anxiety, fear, and grief, but then also are now having to serve as educators to white folks. So I'd say, when I'm saying listen to and learn from people of color, I'm saying white folks do our homework first, right? Like Google's a powerful tool if we want to learn about redlining. You know, there are plenty of Black liberation theology texts out there that we can read, womanist texts. There are, you know, relationships that we can engage in that don't always call on people to put their pains and their knowledge out there for our benefit.
One quick thing, if I may, please.
Great. I can tell by the look on your face.
Just chomping at the bit. Thank you, Dr. Draper. I'm glad you said it. From a white man's mouth to hopefully the white people's ears, they heard what you said. Because it is in the DNA. It's been perpetuated again and again and again. And it is a deprogramming. It is a surrendering. It is a thought of loss of power. And who doesn't want to lose their power? We just talked about power. We just talked about that. So no one wants to give up their power, right? But then
it's scary, Pastor Williams.
Yes, it is. It very much so is. Especially my white brothers and sisters in the church, the evangelicals, the ones who profess Christ and Christ's life. Where is that? Where are they on the front lines? A lot of them have stood back. And I just saw a commercial, and I won't call his name, but his father was very prominent, very prominent. His father was very prominent, and he never stood up. He never stood up during this whole time with Black Lives Matter. He stood with number 45. For those of you in the UK don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our president, to whom I call number 45. He's the 45th president, and he never said anything. He went along with 45. Just today, I saw a commercial and he said, Black Lives Matter. I don't know who got to him. I don't know what happened, but now he's trying to embrace. But then in the back of my head, are you really trying to embrace? Is that what you're really trying to do? Or are you trying to save face? Because there's a difference when you embrace versus when you're trying to save face. And so these are some of the things that we have to deal with when we talk about also Christianity and racism, and taking that part and teaching in your congregations. The best place of segregation is on Sunday mornings, where you have all the white folks in the white church and all the black folks in the black church, or you have a white pastor with 80-90% black congregants. But I've yet to see a black pastor, and maybe they're out there, with 85 to 90% white members.
We're going to talk about the church a little bit more in this next section. I do want to make one comment in this. We are actually an hour and 40 minutes in already. Time is flying past. We're almost out of time. So I do want to move us forward, but because of what I'm saying in questions, I want to make one more statement about white privilege, because clearly there's a lot of confusion in this issue. I just want to make a comment and suggest that, for example, the difference between white superiority and white privilege. White superiority is a dominance factor that we were talking about, where someone presumes that they have a greater position. The interesting thing about white privilege is that it's much more subtle.
Yes.
It's assumed because of the fact, and it can be even unconscious, it's so unsubtle, because white privilege are the things that result from having had a dominance. It may not be you personally, it may not be anything that you did, but because of what has taken place or what has evolved, you have an opportunity there that has been established that you may not have done anything to get, but it is there and it's inherent, and so inherent, and sometimes that you don't even have to think about it, and it's still there. That's some of what that previous video was talking about as well. And so I want to jump to next thing. We want to bring in Joe Paul, and we've got one or two more questions, and then we'll take a final break and a final section. We got to move.
Yes. Joe Paul, why does it seem that police and the judicial system treat blacks, especially black men, different from whites?
You know, it's a great question. And I'm going to go back a little bit to, I think, what Dr. Draper had talked about in the beginning of our discussion in terms of the evolution, post-emancipation through the Reconstruction. Black codes were established that targeted African Americans predominantly for behaviors and tendencies that were proportionate to their group, and added more sanction to those behaviors than their counterparts. It was, quoted in certain papers back in the turn of the century, in the turn of the 20th century, that a white man can get away with killing his wife with less time than a black man for stealing a horse under black codes. And so the idea is perpetuated when you begin to insulate law enforcement officers from internal investigations that are independently sanctioned by outside bodies that can disprove or prove the integrity of an investigation against the black person. When, again, a white officer can kill an unarmed black person with the impunity of the legal system, because the DA's office, the prosecutors typically work with law enforcement much more than the public defenders, who typically, I was told by one of my criminal defense buddies that the black man's law firm is the public defender's office. And that is, you have the right to legal counsel through the office of the public defender. And you're not going to get, they're going to do the best they can, but they're overwhelmed. So to get to your question, it is a matter of an entrenched ideal. This disparity between our access to resources, our access to education, our access to that redlining issue. The first step in wealth is property acquisition. And we've been declining that opportunity for centuries now. And so when you start dealing with those levels of inequities and, what people have to do, and there's so many criminological or sociological theories out there to speak to social deviance, that's just in general what people as human beings would do, let alone oppressed people that consistently find themselves, in this underclass system. They're going to react and they're going to do what they do. And so crime, whether it be, property crimes or what they would call quality of life crimes, theft, shoplifting, things like that, drug selling, drug use, homelessness, mental illness, all these things that make up our criminal justice system. Right now, LA County jail system is the largest mental health system in the country. A criminal justice system is the largest mental health system in this country. That's our Twin Towers jail here in LA County. And so you look at these entrenched or systemic issues that are perpetuated by new laws that come about, you're only going to find yourself continuing this slippery slope. A quote comes to mind from Friedrich Nietzsche, and he said that fear is the mother of all morality. And so as you continue to perpetuate or ostracize a group of people out of perceived fear, that is not substantiated at all. Whether we talk about how many folks get pulled over and actually have, you know, paraphernalia or drugs on them in a black and white space, is typically white people that are more inclined to get caught like that. But we are the ones that end up, you know, with cases that the DA picks up. And so you find yourself in this place as people that it's like, how much can you stand? Well, if you're going to blame me for it, then I'll just behave like it then. And that's what we see with gang culture. And that's what we see with subcultures other than gangs in African-American communities. And you see people not, you know, snitching, quote unquote, because of this. We got to get away somehow. We got to get a victory somehow. I mean, so, you know, how do we deal with it and how do we address it? I was thinking and I'm not going to belabor this, but I was thinking as we were talking, because this has turned into such a robust conversation just on the issue, that Black people, we need resiliency training. We need to begin to redress the issues of trauma in its protracted state by resiliency. How do we build up and heal ourselves as a whole to begin to even take advantage of opportunities that will perhaps come out of these discussions post George Floyd, that gives us equal access to voting, that gives us equal access to wealth, that gives us equal access to education? It's still going to take resiliency. And so how do we make sure as the church or as professionals who are in the helping business of some sort to really ensure that people's resiliency and their ability to manage through, you know, the social ills that we still are going to feel regardless of what redress occurs legally or otherwise to, you know, what we're protesting against right now. So, you know, the system is the system. It's been around a very long time. I think educating ourselves with our constitutional rights, that's in the UK, that's here in the United States. It's about voting and electing the right legislators that understand our position and speak to our needs in this representative government that we still possess, that hasn't changed, and really making sure that our people are informed when they show up to those polls to vote.
Thank you for that answer. Listen, we got 15 minutes left. We're going to take one more break, and then we'll be right back. We got a few things that we're not going to have time to cover, but we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. One last one.
Not everyone wants to see these statues and symbols removed. Some people in our area are taking a stand for what they say is local history. 10 News reporter Shane Dwyer has the message some in Floyd County shared tonight about their Confederate monument.
In Floyd Thursday night, Confederate flags flapped in the wind, and 24 people say they're taking a stand. Randall Tucker and his wife organized this Save the Monuments protest in front of the Floyd County Courthouse.
It doesn't matter what color, black, pink, purple, white, we're all here for the same reason. We're all the same people. We're here to save our heritage, our history, trying to teach it and put it down through generation after generation.
This comes after Governor Ralph Northam announced the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond would come down, and protesters began toppling other monuments on their own. Earlier this week, this woman sat in this exact same area, offering literally to break bread and discuss it. But supporters like Renee Armstrong say otherwise.
If you don't pay attention to history, it repeats itself. So we need to learn from these monuments and learn from, past mistakes.
The monument went up in the early 1900s by the local chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. It reads, "In memory of the fallen braves, the Confederate soldiers," which this group says isn't offensive.
I don't think it's a shrine. I think it's just a sign of respect. It's got all the battles on the bottom of the monument, both wins and losses, but I mean, it's an important part of history.
A small handful of people opposed the group's message, including this woman who came with a sign chanting Black Lives Matter. But Tucker and the group remain unswayed.
I want the monument to stay. I want to teach my children about it. I want to teach my grandchildren about it. And as far as I'm concerned, that's where it needs to stay forever.
In Floyd, Shane Dwyer, 10 News, working for you.
Protesters say they don't know of any threats to the Floyd County Confederate monument, but they say they will strongly defend it against anyone who tries to get it taken down.
Sorry about that. So that particular video is kind of an opposite side of the story to a lot of what we've heard most recently. We've talked a lot and heard a lot of people who feel that these things are inappropriate and they're, troublesome, et cetera, for a lot of different reasons. I wanted to show that there are many times two sides to the story. So to that end, I though want to throw this question out, and it's going to Pastor Lorraine to talk about this for a moment. By the way, 4:19, we've only got like 10 minutes left. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot we're not going to get to. We have a lot of questions that have come in about the church, and we could spend another 30 minutes on that alone. That was part of where my drop the bomb question was. But we're going to have to wind this up. So I want to do this one, and then we're going to kind of start closing down. So the symbols like the Confederate flag in the United States, or names, locations, monuments that symbolize horrific events of the past, do they play into systemic racism? And how do you feel about others that would have an other side of the story? And how we reconcile that? Pastor Lorraine. You gotta come off mute.
I'll try to be very quickly about this. Yes, the statues. Imagine if every group of people who had something done to them, there was a constant can you hear me?
Yes.
There was a constant reminder of a horrific event. And so in my humblest opinion, I feel that those kinds of monuments should be in a museum. We're not trying to erase the past. That's not what we're trying to do at all. But we don't want to continually look at something like that. To me, even though you have this person on a horse or what have you, it puts in my mind what they were fighting for in the first place when we're dealing about the Confederate flag. What that was all about, number one. Number two, when you think about that, we're dealing with the whole slavery mentality. And no one wants to continuously be reminded that you at one point were so superior that you took my ancestors, put them in a hand somewhat loose, and took a whip to their backs that had stripes woven all over their backs. Who wants to deal with it? It's time for us to move forward if we're going to unite. Now, my white counterparts, they see it as history. But I would ask them question, how about if we reversed it? And now you're the one with your hands tied up, hanging from a tree, and we take the whip to your back, and then the ancestors thereafter are now monuments. That's what I would say. That's a short answer. I have more.
Thank you for that answer. Each of these, there are so many of these topics that we could continue to expand out more and more and more. And like I said, there have been many surrounding the church, which I really would love to get into. But unfortunately, we're going to go to the last question of the day. I'm going to point it, first of all, to Marcia to introduce us, and then we're going to open it up. And it's a very general question. The question is, what do you think? You think overall things are improving? Are we headed in the right direction? Now, we're going to have to treat this as everybody's final comment as well. So 1 minute, or let's keep it to 1 minute. Just your thoughts. Are things improving? Are we headed in the right direction?
I have a friend of mine who always says that, you get an answer to things when you start talking, because then you start airing your views, exchanging ideas. And what's really good is that there is a collective conversation happening. I was really not pleased, but it was good to hear Dr. Draper be really open and honest about being a white Christian and the way that they think, and talking about unpacking the way that they think and starting a dialogue on a more even plane. And that's the way that we need to move forward. We need to keep on talking, and people in positions, black and white people in positions, need to start making changes to bring about the equality that we are seeking for. And if necessary, we're going to have to go and seize the power. But at this present moment in time, we're talking, which means it can be done peacefully. And I think what happened in South Africa with Nelson Mandela sets a great template that we can actually follow, because it was passing over on power, but it was also about the talking and the reconciliation and the clamour for justice afterwards. So that's my few words.
Thank you. That's Pastor Pursley.
Yes, whether or not the racism is improving, I do see some improvement only because of the exposure and the dialogue. Those that try to sweep it under the rug, they can no longer sweep it under the rug. And so with that dialogue and recent events, I do see a bright future. I see a long path, but I do see a bright future. So I'm optimistic when it comes to racism in this country. I believe that our nation, now I don't want to go into theology or anything, but our nation needs to return back to God. Statistically, you will see that church attendance is historically low. And those people who not profess to be Christianity is becoming less and less and less in this country. And so I just think that we need revival. We need the revival in this nation, and this attack against racism is a part of that revival. And so I'm optimistic concerning
Thank you, Pastor. So we're going to go to Mr. Paul.
Excellent. I'm going to read something in my thought to this question, and it's an excerpt from the Gettysburg Address from Abraham Lincoln to the question of where we are right now, considering where we came from. But Abraham Lincoln said in his speech, "It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth." And I think that his thoughts in that very sacred place still resonate high here. We're coming together as a result of a loss of life. And there's countless other lives who have been lost under these same conditions. And I think it is on us moving forward with the intent of the spirit of this convening today to continue to perpetuate in every space that we stand in, that power system that has been so predominant is done. You know, in closing, the idea of the Hebrews and the Gentiles really strikes me in the consideration of African Americans in contrast to the establishment of this country constitutionally. And just as the Gentiles were brought into the covenant, so Blacks now have a right to access the authority and the power of our Constitution. And I think it's for us to educate ourselves and really be empowered to make sure we exercise those rights and privileges as it was established. And that's my thought on it.
Dr. Draper.
I'm not sure how hopeful I am at this moment. Probably 10, 15 years ago, I would have been a lot more hopeful, but pulling on all the strands of systemic racism, once you track those down and find out how deeply entrenched it is in educational structures and standardized testing and immigration laws and citizenship and policing and incarceration and so on and so forth, I don't know how hopeful I am that we, through our, yes, we need to work, but somehow we need the judgment of God on this situation in a way that is sustaining, right? Like, we have the hope of the eschaton. We have the hope that someday all things will be made right in Christ and people from every tongue, tribe, and nation will surround the throne and the Lamb. And we look forward to that day. But I think at this moment, it's probably closer to Revelation chapter 6, where the souls are under the throne saying, "How long, O Lord, until our blood will be avenged on the earth?" And so, and there's times where those souls are told, wait a little longer, but it's coming. So I have ultimate hope that there will be restitution and judgment and recompense. And through repentance, I hope to find myself on the right side of that judgment, but it's by no means guaranteed given my history.
Thank you, sir. We're going to close out with Pastor Lorraine and also Dr. Van Omen, but I want to go to Dr. Land first to kind of close out the panel, and then we're going to kick it back to Dr. Van Omen and Pastor Lorraine to close this out.
I begin by saying to you, from a theological point of view, the darkest hour is just before the break of dawn. And we've had some dark time, but there's light coming. And I believe there's a change coming, and it's beginning with our youth. We have young people today who are witnessing that they have people of color who serve as the presidents of their universities. We have them who recognize that they're members of Congress, both in the House and Senate. There have been Black men sitting in the governor's office, Black men and Black women heading major corporations. And one of them even had the mitigating gall to become the president of the United States of America.
Yes.
We also looking forward now to a good senator from South Carolina by the name of Lindsey Graham, who's shaking in his boots that there's a Black man on the run that's about to take him out of office. So when I said that you have to take power, and I would like to say that some of the changes that have taken place just since the horrible situation with George Floyd. Many of our cities and states are now rethinking the way they're looking at policemen and the rights that they have and how they're acting with Black folks. We also have gone to the place where NASA has now renamed its headquarters in the honor of a Black woman who was considered one of the hidden figures. Mississippi has removed its Confederate symbol off its flag. So while it is very dark right this minute, I see some hope and some light coming. And when I say that we have to seize power, I tell you, if we continue to work with these young folks and we continue to make changes, and if we continue to put the right people in office and we continue to do what we have to do and train our young people, there is no stopping us now as to how far and how high we can go. So I just want to encourage you that there are some members of Congress in the Senate and the House who have been segregationists and very mean old dogs. But they too are looking now, they have grandchildren whose mother or father happens to be Black. And they're now calling them grandma. Young people today have decided they're going to marry who they want to marry. They've been in schools with different ones. They have crossed the racial divide. And so it might be slow in coming, but I see that there's a brighter day coming because I think the darkest time has just passed us and there's light. And I end by saying, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. And I think it has been done in a way now that it's working together for our good. God bless you.
And Dr. Lanoa, thank you for those inspiring words. We appreciate that greatly. I want to say on behalf of myself and my wife, first of all, thank you to everyone for allowing us to be participants and moderators in this. We did our best to keep everything on time, but y'all know it's a little bit of a challenge. We could certainly go on another 2 hours easily just with the information and questions that we have here. So we'll have to discuss whether we do something additional after this. And I also want to make note that this has been recorded. And so there will be a link that will be available. We'll be working to be able to send out information to everybody that registered, including that link. And so more to come on that. Once again, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be involved. we're going to pass this back to the originators, Pastor Lorraine and Dr. Van Omen, and you can share your thoughts, and hopefully everything has been found of value for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor David, and all the panelists here and everyone who attended. It has been a great evening. Well, here it's evening in the UK. I'll keep it very brief because it's time to close this session. But I just want to say thank you. It started with an email that I wrote to you, Lorraine, and I said, can you tell me more? Would you like to share your story with me? And it became this conversation with more than 90 people. I never imagined that when I wrote that email, but I'm deeply, deeply grateful for such a rich conversation. So thank you. Let's keep listening to each other. Lorraine.
Yes, amen. Thank you so much for reaching out to me. It does me good. It does my heart joy. And I want to take this moment and dedicate this webinar to Mary Elizabeth Litzy Dokes and Arthur Dokes Sr. They are my grandparents, and they are the ones who taught me about the times of racism that they had to go through. I just lost my grandfather in March, right before the pandemic hit. I was in Scotland. I had to fly back home because of the COVID-19 and was unable, even though I got home, I could not go to his funeral. But I honor him so much. He was 101 years old, 1 week, and I think 1 day. And I'm so grateful that he was able to live to see the first Black president, because he never, ever thought he would see that in his day. And so to you, my grandmother, and to my grandfather, I honor you with this webinar, teaching me, this little Black girl from Oakland, who's now about to be a PhD doctorate, because of the encouragement and the way they propelled me to seek higher. They only got a 6th grade education, and my grandmother always said, go higher and higher and higher. And hopefully, within a year or two, I will have that degree. And so with that, I say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Van Omen, for being that person that just is a comfort, a place of comfort. And to everybody else who came, thank you. May God bless you. May God keep you, and be safe out there, and keep listening. Goodbye.